Saddam Hussein. You hear that name and what comes to mind? Probably a brutal dictator, right? A defiant leader, and, of course, that final image of a fugitive pulled from a hole in the ground. For decades, he was one of the most powerful and, let's be honest, one of the most feared men in the Middle East. But behind all the headlines, behind the propaganda, there's this incredibly complex and violent story of survival, raw ambition, and the corrupting nature of absolute power. So let's get into the reality behind them.
And that's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? This wasn't some guy born into royalty or a massive fortune. His journey from a fatherless kid in a tiny village to the presidential palace in Baghdad, well, it's a brutal lesson in power, politics, and paranoia. To really understand the dictator, we have to go back and understand the boy.
And his story doesn't start with some grand triumph. It starts with tragedy and hardship. The foundations of who Saddam would become, that deep-seated mistrust, that capacity for incredible violence, it was all forged in a childhood just filled with loss and abuse.
Okay, let's unpack this timeline because it is so important. In 1937, Saddam is born without a father into a poor shepherd family. His mom, suffering from depression, can't handle it and sends him away at just 3 years old to live with his uncle, Hayrullah Talfa, in Baghdad. But then his uncle gets jailed for a failed coup, and young Saddam is forced to go back home to his mother and a horribly abusive stepfather. We're talking beatings, starvation, being forced to steal just to survive. Finally, at age 10, Saddam has had enough. He escapes and runs all the way back to his uncle, who's now out of jail, and this man, Hayrullah Talfa, he becomes the most important figure in Saddam's life, drilling into him this fierce, anti-Western, pan-Arab nationalism that would literally define his entire career.
So it's under his uncle's guidance that Saddam's political fire is lit. His first dream was to get into the military academy, but he failed. He soon found a different path to power, a much more violent one. He was about to dive headfirst into the brutal, cutthroat world of Iraqi politics.
So what was his way in? It was the Ba'ath Party, and its ideology, a perfect match for everything his uncle taught him. This dream of a single, unified Arab nation, totally free from foreign influence, especially from the West. Saddam's dedication was, well, absolute. After dropping out of law school in 1955, he joined up and, with basically no personal life to speak of, he poured every ounce of his energy into the cause. He organized meetings, he led protests, and he shot up through the ranks. The party leadership sought it. They saw his drive, his ruthlessness. They knew this was a guy who could get things done. And boy, were they right. By 1959, the Ba'ath Party decides that the new Prime Minister, Abdel Karim Qasim, is getting way too cozy with the Soviet Union and betraying their pan-Arab cause. So they plan to assassinate him. And who do they pick to lead the hit squad? A 22-year-old Saddam Hussein. On October 7th, on a busy street in Baghdad, Saddam's team ambushes the Prime Minister's motorcade. It's chaos. Qasim's driver is killed, and both the Prime Minister and Saddam himself get shot. The assassination was a failure, but for Saddam, it was a huge turning point.
Suddenly, Saddam becomes the most wanted man in Iraq. But here's the twist. Among a lot of the people, he becomes a kind of folk hero, this young revolutionary who risked it all for the cause. He first hides out on a farm in a place called the Adawa region. Now, I want you to file that name away because, trust me, it's going to come back in a big way at the end of our story. From there, the party smuggles him to Syria and then to Egypt. And this is where things get really interesting. According to declassified documents and intelligence officials, it's in Egypt that Saddam's path crosses with the American CIA. See, at the time, the U.S. also saw the Prime Minister's Soviet leanings as a threat. Reports say that CIA officials were in constant contact with Saddam, giving him money for living expenses and even arranging training through Egyptian intelligence.
So after years in exile, the political chessboard in Iraq gets completely flipped. In 1963, the Ba'ath Party, allegedly with some CIA help, successfully overthrows and executes Prime Minister Qasim. Saddam comes back home, not as a fugitive, but as a key player in the new government. His ruthless climb to the very top was just getting started.
Now, the party actually lost power for a bit, and Saddam even ended up in jail. But he escaped and spent 2 years rebuilding the organization from the shadows. Then, in 1968, he and his relative, General Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, they lead another successful coup. Al-Bakr gets the title of president, but Saddam takes the real power as his deputy and, crucially, as the head of internal security. For the next decade, he was the power behind the throne, building this terrifying intelligence network, placing his loyalists in every corner of the government.
By 1979, the old President al-Bakr was just a figurehead. So Saddam forced him to resign and finally grabbed what he'd wanted all along, to be the one and only undisputed president of Iraq. But just grabbing the top job? Oh no, that wasn't nearly enough for Saddam. He needed to send a message, a brutal, unforgettable message about what happens to anyone who even thinks about challenging him. Just 6 days after becoming president, he calls this urgent meeting of over 400 senior Ba'ath Party leaders in a Baghdad conference hall. The whole thing was filmed, and what happened next was broadcast across the entire nation.
The meeting kicks off with this absolutely shocking scene. A senior party member, Muhi Abd al-Hussein Mashadi, is dragged onto the stage. You can see he's been physically tortured, he's completely broken, and he's forced to read a confession, admitting to a conspiracy against Saddam's new government. Imagine being in that room. Your colleagues, your friends, you're all just watching this unfold in complete, horrified silence as the trap is sprung. As Mashadi is taken away, Saddam just calmly walks to the podium, casually smoking a cigar, and then he starts reading from a list. It has the names of 68 other party members who are sitting right there in the hall, accusing them of being co-conspirators. As he calls each name, armed guards grab the man from his seat and haul him out. You can actually watch the footage of this today. The sheer panic and terror in that room is just chilling as these powerful men realize they've been completely trapped. And this is where you see the terrifying genius of his method. After the 68 accused are removed, Saddam turns to the ones left, congratulating them on their loyalty. But it's not over. 22 of the accused are immediately sentenced to death. And the remaining party leaders in the hall, they are handed weapons and ordered to form the firing squads themselves. They were forced to execute their own colleagues. In one single, horrifying move, Saddam didn't just eliminate his rivals, he made everyone else complicit in their murder. Their loyalty was now sealed in blood.
So, with his power at home now absolute, secured through pure terror, Saddam turned his gaze outward. The 1980s would be defined by two devastating wars that would bankrupt his country, cement his power, and show the entire world the true extent of his brutality.
In 1980, Saddam invades Iran. Why? Well, he was terrified that Iran's Islamic Revolution would inspire Iraq's own Shia majority to rise up against his Sunni government. He also wanted control of a vital waterway. Now, here's the really crucial part. In this war, the United States actively supported Saddam. They saw Iran as the bigger threat. The U.S. gave him billions in loans, weapons, and even satellite intelligence. The war was a brutal 8-year slog. Its most infamous moment was the Halabja chemical attack in 1988, where Saddam's forces gassed thousands of their own Kurdish citizens. And, in the end, it was a total stalemate. No territory was gained, and Iraq was left with a mind-boggling $130 billion in debt.
While the war was raging, Saddam's paranoia about threats from within just grew and grew. In 1982, his convoy was driving through the Shia town of Diyala when gunmen tried to assassinate him. They failed. Saddam's revenge was swift and absolutely merciless. His security forces rounded up hundreds of men, women, and children from the town. After a completely sham trial, 148 men and boys were executed. Now remember this moment, this specific massacre in Diyala, because out of all the terrible things he did, this is the one that's going to come back and seal his fate. So now he's buried in debt from the war with Iran, and Saddam's looking for a quick fix. He accuses his tiny, super-rich neighbor, Kuwait, of stealing Iraqi oil and demands they forgive billions in loans. When Kuwait says no, Saddam does what he knows best. He invades. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi tanks rolled right into Kuwait, and he declared it Iraq's 19th province. This time, though, the world, and especially his former supporter, the United States, turned on him. This led to the 1991 Gulf War, which kicked his forces out, but, amazingly, left him in power. For the next 12 years, Saddam was basically an outcast, his country just crippled by international sanctions. But then, the attacks of September 11, 2001 changed absolutely everything. The United States, now operating under a new doctrine of preemptive war, turned its sights squarely on Baghdad, kicking off the final, dramatic chapter of Saddam Hussein's life. In the wake of 9/11, the Bush administration started building its case for war against Iraq. The main justifications they gave the world were, 1, that Saddam had a hidden arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, and 2, that his secular regime was somehow working with the religious fanatics of al-Qaeda. Now, despite UN inspectors on the ground finding no real evidence of WMDs, the invasion went ahead in March 2003. Baghdad fell in a matter of weeks, and Saddam Hussein, the man who had ruled Iraq with an iron fist for over 30 years, just vanished. He was now the most wanted man on the planet.
The manhunt dragged on for nearly 9 months. For a long time, U.S. forces were chasing ghosts, focusing on high-level Ba'athist leaders. The breakthrough came when an Army intelligence officer had a brilliant idea. He said, "Forget the generals. Let's go after the people who really know him from before he was president, his childhood friends, his cooks, his drivers." This new strategy led them to a family called the Al-Muslets, who were basically handling Saddam's security and logistics. On December 12, 2003, they captured one of the brothers, Ibrahim al-Muslet. After a short interrogation, he broke and gave them the location, a farm in Ad-Dor. The very next day, they launched Operation Red Dawn. 600 soldiers swarmed that farm in Ad-Dar, the exact same region where Saddam had hidden after that first failed assassination attempt back in 1959. The story had come full circle. At first, they found nothing. Frustrated, they brought the informant, Ibrahim, to the scene. He pointed at a beat-up floor mat in a little hut. When the soldiers pulled it back, they found a small, camouflaged entrance plugged with styrofoam. And then, from the darkness below, they heard a cough. An interpreter yelled down, and a voice called back, "I am Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq, and I am willing to negotiate." There was no negotiation. They pulled him out of that tiny spider hole, bearded and disarmed. His reign of terror was finally over.
Saddam was handed over to the new Iraqi government to stand trial. Now, you'd think they'd throw the book at him for everything, the wars, the gas attacks, but the prosecution was smart. They chose to focus on a single, clear-cut case they knew they could prove, that 1982 Dujail massacre. He was found guilty of crimes against humanity for ordering the execution of those 148 men and boys. On December 30, 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed by hanging. The fall of Saddam Hussein was, without a doubt, a massive moment in modern history. A tyrant was gone, yes, but what followed with years of insurgency, instability, and brutal sectarian violence. And that central reason for the invasion, the weapons of mass destruction that were supposed to be this imminent threat, they were never found. And that leaves us with a really tough question, one we're still grappling with today. How does the world justify removing a sovereign leader? And what are the responsibilities that come with the consequences?